One of the key drivers of growth for India from here on is how the marquee names of India Inc. view the India story. Will the old business houses which have defined corporate India so far want to plow back into the India story, or would they rather take their money abroad and be part of the global story? Joining us now for perspective on where his group is at this moment, the different factors playing themselves out domestically and geopolitically, is the head of the Aditya Birla Group, Kumaramangalam Birla. Thank you so much, sir, and it's fantastic to have you. Thank you. It's great to have you with us at the India Today Studio. I want to understand from you your macro view on the economy from the perspective of the Aditya Birla Group, because it seemed like India was poised for a takeoff on the back of the pandemic. And then Russia, Ukraine happened, we're seeing inflation, we're seeing interest rates go up. Is that dampening spirits about the bounce back, and to what extent?
So I can speak for myself, Rahul. I think that inflation is obviously a global phenomenon, right? After what's happening with Ukraine and Russia, energy prices are going up, inflation is going up, commodity prices, metal prices, food shortage could be a real problem, unemployment. So I don't think inflation is obviously not an issue that's specific to us. I think that the government actually seems to be, very quick to take action to contain inflation. The fundamentals remain very much the same as far as we're concerned. We would look at structural, sectoral trends, multi-decadal trends, because that's the kind of time horizon that we have in mind when we invest. And I think India looks very good. I remain very positive about India. It is the fastest growing economy in the world, something that people here in Davos also recognize. It doesn't go unnoticed. We have about $7 billion of capex, $7 billion of capex announced and under implementation in India. We also have about $3 billion announced and again underway overseas, largely in Novelis. So I think it's very exciting times. The fact that we are very low on debt, hardly have debt, and have strong cash flows, gives us that extra sort of power and extra headroom. So yeah, on India, I remain very positive. I think that we really are shining out vis-a-vis the rest of the global economies.
Now, there are two theories that are playing themselves out at this time, and I'm curious to know what you think. One is that we're poised for a 5-year investment cycle because of cuts in corporate tax, because of pent-up demand, because of the fact that there were 2 no-show years because of the pandemic, that this is India's opportunity and we're set for takeoff. The other is that given the lingering geopolitical uncertainty, no one knows when the war will end, no one knows what may happen next. Could there, God forbid, be nuclear escalation? Therefore, industrialists and corporate houses will hold back, see how things play themselves out before taking decisions to invest. How do you see this?
So, these macro issues will always be there. I mean, we've been through many macro situations. We had the US-China trade war, we had the tsunami in Japan, we had floods in Thailand. So obviously, a nuclear story is a much bigger and more impactful one. But that's not new. I mean, there's nothing new that really could practically happen there. The war is a matter of worry. And obviously, interest rates will go up, not just here in India, but across the world. 9 central banks, if I remember right, have increased rates in the last 4 weeks. And the Fed's increase is the highest it's been in the last 20 years. So that's very telling. I don't see how that dampens the India story, though. In fact, I think it makes the India story even stronger.
In what way?
Because you have macros that are very much in place. I think that some of the steps the government is taking, like I was saying, have to be seen in the context that we're in today. Demand is good. Costs have gone up because of, fuel costs going up globally. Cost of commodities going up for people for whom it's an input. So our margins have come down in Q4 almost across the board. But the fundamentals of most of the businesses and India as a growth story, to me, remains pretty much unchanged.
I'm curious to understand how you see the group evolve in the post-pandemic era, because it's said that these 2 years have changed everything. So between the vision that you had for the Aditya Birla Group just before the pandemic, how have you seen that vision evolve, and where do you hope to take the group in the next few years?
So I think the vision remains pretty much the same. It's about being a leader in the sector that we are in, which has only sort of in the last 2 years we've only bolstered our position as leaders. Leaders being defined as number one or number two. We focus very much on cash flows. We have very strong cash generating businesses. I think I was saying that debt at a group level, debt to EBITDA is less than 1. So huge headroom for growth. I think the one big change is going to be on technology, not just in digital, but also in the sense of, let's say, the whole supply chain part of things. Right from the sort of point where my supplier ships his, my raw material to the time that I sell to my customer. The ideal situation would be to have a see-through across the entire part of the value chain. That's going to have an impact, and that's going to take a lot of reskilling and learning new skills.
Do you want to build
a lot of technology
and explain how? Because one of the big changes that we're seeing is that supply chains are moving from just in time to just in case, and all kinds of eventualities are now being factored in. Resilience is the key driving theme about ensuring that supply chains stay resilient. So how are you trying to register that?
So very broadly, I mean, it depends from business to business, but I think that we use JIT so far to, control costs, to improve efficiencies. Now it's more about reliability, it's more about resilience. So, you would need to keep some buffer stock. To that extent, your costs would go up at a granular level. But I think the way to keep costs down is going to be through technology. It's going to be a lot of stuff. It could be IoT, it'll be digitization, it could be sensors, it could be drones, all of that put together. So you require, a whole lot of people, maybe very young people who are digitally native and who can put this in place for all of our businesses.
Does this rapid march of technology unnerve you at times, that as a legacy business group, the speed at which you're able to move versus some of these much wanted startups that can move far more agile and can get things done faster? So how do you see this concern about startups setting the pace, and as a legacy business house trying to keep up with those same transformations?
No, I don't think we're trying to keep up with anyone. I think that a startup has its own advantages, as does a traditional business house like us. I think that once we focus on a particular issue or a particular, a cause, so to speak, we are very quick to move on it. So it doesn't mean that big is slow. I think that we've shown a lot of aggression, both internally in our in the way we run our businesses, also externally in the way we've grown. I'm not comparing with startups because they're very unlike situations. I'm just saying that for us, for large businesses, I think adopting technology with greater depth, especially on the side of the whole supply chain part of things, is going to be a whole new area of focus.
Competition seems to be heating up in some of your businesses. We've seen the Adani Group come in, pick up Holcim. How does that impact your plans for what you're doing? And are you looking now behind your shoulder, and how is that playing out for you?
Not really. I mean, our story, sort of remains unchanged. If we would have loved to have those assets, but at a much lower value. We have other more value accretive options to grow in the cement business. These are existing assets. It's not like someone has created new assets. So I don't see how it changes competitive dynamics as far as we're concerned.
And your hopes to strengthen and consolidate your position in the businesses where you're entrenched, where you're seeing competition trying to creep in and possibly try and push you?
We're pretty used to competition. I mean, we are the group that went overseas in the early 70s. So having been exposed to global competition then, is kind of percolated down over the years. So competition is not an issue, and I think we're pretty much focused on running our own race, so to speak. Competition is always a good thing in many ways.
Let's talk a bit about your investments. There was the announcement about the investment into paints, where you want to double the investments that you've made, focus on building capex. Can you talk us through some of the key sectors that you want to build on and your roadmap for that?
So, I think broadly remain the same. All the businesses that we are in, so whether it's metals, financial services, fashion retail, cement, specialty chemicals, I think there's tremendous potential to grow in all of these. And given the fact that our balance sheets are so strong, that gives us, that extra push to be able to grow even faster and more aggressively. And I think across the group, practically every business is poised to take the next big steps going forward. I think paints is a very interesting sector. We have a right to win, I believe, because it overlaps with cement and white cement, where we have a very entrenched position. That's a very interesting play for us. Like I've said, in the next 5 years, we want to be a very strong second player in the paints business.
Do you see tech possibly providing some kind of a push over there in terms of using tech to power some of these new business plans that you have?
So tech is pretty much a part of every business plan now. You've got to just figure how tech plays a differentiating role in each business. It's different for paints as it would be for financial services. But I think technology is a very sort of integral part of any business today.
So you've made a big play in the fashion space, and I've always wondered, what is it that draws you, given the fact that a lot of the designers that you're now working with couldn't achieve scale? So what is it that you hope to achieve which they couldn't do earlier, and what is it about just the whole sector that excites you?
So the designer acquisitions are quite a small part of ABFRL actually. It's actually in a broader sense a play on ethnic, which we believe is, has a strong growth story in India in particular. I think fashion retail, we've been in it for the longest time. We've been the largest player in our segments. You just look at demography, you look at income groups going up, income levels going up, aspirational value of fashion, clothing, as you might call it. It's just a high growth sector that we understand well.
And just as it so happens, there's also consolidation happening in the fashion sector, with you picking up a lot of the marquee designers and the Reliance Group doing the same. And it seems to be becoming, in this sector, in initially quite an unanticipated fashion, once again, Birla versus Reliance.
Not really. I don't think I'm seeing it that way at all. I think we just basically, it's the sector that is attractive. So any large player in that sort of industry would have sensed that by now.
Okay, so let's step out of what's happening in India and talk a bit about what you're picking up about India in your travels and in all the interactions that you're having with people who are looking at India globally.
So very positive views on India. I haven't heard anyone saying that we don't want to invest in India. I think that the fact that China has been under lockdown, a large part of China, 75% of the provinces, especially Shanghai, in terms of contribution to GDP of China, have been shut down for a long time, and therefore it shakes investors' confidence. And I think that they see India as a sort of natural option. I didn't hear about any major concerns that people have about investing in India, from private equity to FDI to FII. Most people have sector preferences, but a positive view on the country. So I think that this is really a good time for us to try and leap forward, given that we are standing out just now.
From a policy perspective, in terms of being able to capitalize on the growing thinking in boardrooms globally in MNCs that there's a need to have a China plus one supply chain now, do you think India is doing as much as it should to try and capitalize on that opportunity? We've seen Vietnam be a big beneficiary. We've seen in textiles Bangladesh be a big beneficiary. What more would you like to see the government do, and what do you make of what's being done so far?
I think that'll have to be a sector by sector sort of a reply. But I think the role of government is to create an enabling environment, and policy making is part of that. I'm not sure if there is something that the government needs to do in specific sectors. I wouldn't know about that. But like I said, I don't hear any concerns from anyone here saying they don't want to invest in India, or there's any apprehension that they have about investing in India. So really, it's a good time for us, and I think we need to capitalize on it.
But that's the key point, capitalize on it, because as many Davos veterans would say, it's been a good time for a long time. And ye apna time kab aayega is the question, because the pandemic happened, now these global tensions, so a lot of being poised for takeoff, but just actually taking off. Is it just...
So I think we've seen a lot of inflows, especially on the private equity side. I think what we want to see now is inflows on the FDI side, which also has picked up. Like I said, I think that this is a time when we are actually standing out, because all the other economies, whether it's Europe, whether it's the US, are struggling with their own problems to one extent or the other. I think that these investors have clear preferences in terms of which sectors, and I think given the right opportunities, they're quite happy to come and invest in India.
What are the sectors you're most bullish on?
I'm bullish about all the sectors that we're in.
No, but and growth sectors in addition to your existing lines of businesses?
So there are several. I think digital has some nice opportunities. Of course, it's a whole new ball game, and we're still trying to figure out what we want to do in the sector, and how best we should play in the sector. But obviously, some very, very enterprising work happening there.
Mm-hmm. As I conclude, I want your sense of how the week for you here has been, and in terms of your expansion plans globally. You've made announcements of investments in the United States and elsewhere. How significant is that? Because you're one of the groups that's actually succeeded abroad, and how do you see that play itself out over the next few years?
So it's been a very eventful few days here. Some very intellectually stimulating conversations with very, very interesting people who you definitely don't get to meet under one roof over 2 or 3 days. So it's time really well spent. We're making pretty substantial investments overseas. Novelis recently announced a $2.5 billion expansion of a new capacity, actually, a greenfield capacity in aluminium rolling in Alabama for, it'll start implementing that and commission it in the next 3 years. Carbon Black has their own expansion plan. So we're looking at an expansion of about $3-4 billion overseas. We have the advantage of having been overseas for a long time, and therefore having a comfort of investing in those economies. So I think, good time, very exciting time ahead for us.
As you look back at the pandemic, what was your biggest learning?
I think it's people who make the difference, and it's the commitment that people have to the organization that really makes the difference. And I think we are very blessed to have a very committed set of people across the group, across the businesses.
Kumaran, you've spoken a bit about the India story, about your plans for India, as also your plans globally and the sectors that you're most excited about. We appreciate you taking our time and joining us here at the India Today studio at Davos. Thank you so much.
Thanks, sir.
Thank you.
Thanks.
To get a sense of some of the emerging trends that we're seeing in the IT sector, not just in India, but globally, we're joined here at the World Economic Forum in Davos by the Executive Chairman of Wipro, Rishad Premji. Thank you very much, Rishad. It's fantastic weather. Do you like it more now when it's a bit nippy, or in January?
It's nice to be outside. It's nice to be sort of here in May, not falling in the snow, but it's still freezing cold. People can't tell that, but it is cold.
One of the biggest beneficiaries of what's happened during the pandemic has been the IT sector. As the world attempts to bounce back after the pandemic, what are the kind of meta trends that you're seeing play themselves out, particularly in the IT sector?
No, look, COVID has been unfairly kind to the technology industry, right? I think what COVID has done has forever changed the mindset of organizations across the world in terms of how they think about their digital journeys, how they leverage technology to engage more impactfully and smartly with their customers, right? That was always something that was moving. It has just accelerated dramatically through COVID. And so these journeys of how do we move to the cloud more fast? How do we leverage data and artificial intelligence more impactfully to drive hyper-personalization and segmentation so you can offer customers things that they actually want and need? How do you leverage security? How do you make your environment more secure? And how do you leverage talent that is available in countries like India smartly to drive this journey? And I think that only accelerates with COVID. And despite everything that's happening in the world, and we can talk a little bit more about that, I think that continues for the foreseeable future.
So how has the Ukraine-Russia war impacted what you're doing? Because there's been a lot of talk of geopolitical tensions impacting the way the global economy is configured. How is it playing out?
So there are multiple different elements. Certainly the Ukraine war is one component. COVID, the reality is it's not over yet. There's rising commodity prices, there's inflation, there's a lot of uncertainty. So it's quite interesting when you are here in Davos and talking to people. People are incredibly worried about the environment. They're also uncertain about how the environment unfolds over the next 6, 10, 12 months. At the same time, people are still investing. Demand is still quite buoyant. Right? And you talk to a whole bunch of people, from the consultants to the private equity folks to customers. There's a sense of optimism in terms of spend still continuing, even though people are cautious. So I see the environment still staying quite robust and quite, positive for the foreseeable future.
The one thing that's so often spoken about whenever the IT sector is in the news is the great resignation. How has it played out for you? What have you been doing to try and keep the young workforce that you have completely plugged in and not joining the great resignation?
Yeah. It's very interesting. One of the big things that's happened is we have about 45% of people who joined us in the last 24 months, right? 45% of people who haven't walked into a Wipro office, who've engaged with their managers and a couple of people around them. And so they've built no sense of connect with the organization. So we can talk about hybrid work model as well, because we're quite keen that people come back at least some of the time to drive this osmosis, to drive that engagement. But we've been trying to find innovative ways of connecting with people. How do we connect with them informally through a transactional medium like video? But there's no replacement to coming back and connecting in person. The reality has also been there's been inordinate demand and finite supply, and that also creates huge optionality and also creates a huge amount of churn. And we've been working hard to drive down that churn over the last couple of years. In fact, one of the things we've done today is we've significantly increased our fresher hiring. So we hired about 10,000 people in 21, 20,000 people last year. We'll hire 40,000 people this year. And we're giving them a roadmap. So we're telling them, when you join us today, in your offer letter, if you do X, Y, and Z, if you grow and if you perform at these levels, you can be at a compensation of X in year 5, and you can be doing these kinds of roles in year 5. So we're also trying to provide some sort of stability and visibility to people to also sort of make that a draw, because oftentimes we lose people in that year 2, year 3, year 4 time frame.
So how difficult has it been to get people to come back to work? Because many went back to their hometowns, got used to working in their pajamas. You're here all suited, booted, you got a tie as well. But is it really difficult to get them back? And what kind of hybrid models are you looking at?
No, it is tough. The reality is still a large chunk of people are working from their hometowns. People have gone back, they are living with their parents, they're eating good home cooked food, they're spending less, they're saving more. And so it is going to be tough. I'm a big believer, Rahul, that we have to move into some sort of a hybrid model. We would like all of our people to come into the office some of the time. We've just opened up our offices in April 3 days a week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday. We made it optional for people to come back at the moment. We are gently nudging them to come back. But I'm a big believer that we must come back in person for 2 reasons. One is for culture. As I was mentioning, 45% of our people haven't walked into an office. Culture grows when people gossip over coffee, gossip over lunch, connect with their colleagues, discover the smell of the office, the smell of the place. Incredibly important for culture growth. And for us, we're very proud of our culture. It's one of our core defining propositions of who we are as an organization. The other is for ideas and innovation, because ideas and innovation don't happen in linear form. They happen when people are sitting together in a conference room and people are frustrated, but suddenly something strikes. And I think for both those reasons, it's incredibly important people come back. So we are going to be on this journey.
But there's a disconnect between the way that you see it in terms of wanting to bring people back because of the cultural issues, and the way a lot of young techies see it. Say, hey, Rishad, if I can do the same job sitting back home, why do you need me? Judge me by what I deliver. And if I'm doing well, why can't I keep staying at home? And if you don't like me, I'm off.
Yeah, but I think there's also a bunch of people, Rahul, that want to come back.
Sure.
That want to have a sense of connectedness, that want to have a social equation in the office, right? That want to build a sense of community around them as well. So that's equally important to people. And we'll have to strike the right balance. I mean, the other advantage to your point of having flexibility is inclusiveness, right? You can attract people who want the flexibility, women after having children, people with disabilities, people who want to stay in small towns. And so maybe we'll also come up with a model where X percentage of our people can work from home on a full-time basis and maybe come in for a few days a month, etc. But for the majority of people, we would want to try and push to get to some sort of a hybrid model. And we'll discover what that is. The one other big learning, Rahul, has been you can't be too fixated on your views. You have to have a very dynamic approach to sort of evaluate how this can unfold. But we're going to try and get to this hybrid model.
But because companies across sectors are now suddenly saying that we're digital and tech companies, right? That's led to a huge surge in demand. And salaries have gone through the roof. You could give somebody 100% increment and yet there's no guarantee that he'll come on board. They'll have 3 or 4 offers. So A, how badly is that impacting you? And B, to what extent do you think you're being able to deal with it?
Yeah. No, it's a reality. The reality is compensation levels are stressed. The reality is people are making infinitely more when they move, right? And so you have to keep up with that. I mean, we've done a bunch of salary increases last year. We've done some bonuses. We'll do another salary increase this July. But the other thing, Rahul, I'm a big believer in is people stay and leave for 2 reasons. One is they leave because they can get compensated more and it's lifestyle changing. The other is they leave if they don't have a sense of connectedness. You know, we both were at the same school and I had a professor that said to me that, you know, if you have one friend at work, the likelihood of you staying on goes up by 30%. And if that friend happens to be your boss, the likelihood of you staying on goes up by 70%. So you need to have a sense of connectedness. You know, I keep telling folks, you've got to be friends with the people who work in your team. Somebody's got to care that, you know, Rahul is happy, that his career is growing, that he's enjoying his job. So we've got to drive both things, the compensation piece, which is important to retain people, but also the connectedness piece, which I think is equally important.
And speaking of this journey, one of the things that you did when you took over as executive chairman is really to try and pivot Wipro into a more cutting edge kind of space. I mean, with no offense to the way things were, it was seen largely on the outside, at least, as being slightly stodgy company. And you've changed that. And how has that transformation been? To what extent is that journey complete? And to what extent does it continue? And what's the next milestone you're working towards?
So, Rahul, it's a journey. So you never finish the journey. For me, it's never a destination. It's a journey. Look, it's an exciting few years for us. I mean, we feel blessed. I think there's 2 changes that have happened. One is we as a company transforming, and the other is the industry is also transformed. If one can say, thanks to COVID. But we're very excited about the journey that we've been on. You know, we've dramatically. I joke with Thierry Delaporte is our CEO, and I joke with him that, you know, if you'd asked me 2.5 years ago that we could see a Frenchman running the company, I would have said no way. But the reality is he's really believes and lives the sensibilities and the values of the company, really understands who we are, and so leverages the strengths of the company, driven tremendous disruption and change, and struck the right balance, which there's no playbook for that, but I think it struck the right balance beautifully. We've changed the way we are organized. We've brought a whole strong focus on the market. We've become obsessed with growth in a very, very strong, profound way. We've built a strong, large deals team. We've really enhanced our focus on our partner. So there's a lot of exciting. We've gotten a lot of new leaders to the company, and yet a lot of our strong old-time leaders are also a very strong central part of the organization. So you spoke of
the balance, and that's something that you've been able to strike quite well, because a lot of Indian CEOs or proprietors tend to struggle with that. Having empowered CEOs and empowered teams, and yet having an active role in the way the company shapes up. So how's it been, and how have you been working on that?
No, Thierry runs the company, and the success and the failure of the company is all credit to him. And my job is to enable him, right? My job is to sort of help where I can help. And you've got to be very clear that the power center sits with him. The confusion oftentimes happens when there are two people trying to play the same role, and that never works. And so you have to respectfully take a step back and really empower the leader of the company, and I'm trying very hard to do that.
That's fantastic. I mean, it's very interesting that you're saying it, you're so clear-headed, voicing it in public, and that's the message that goes down in the teams as well. Yeah. What are you making of what we're seeing play out now on the private equity venture capital space in the Indian startup ecosystem? There's a lot of talk suddenly of gloom and doom, layoffs, funding drying up. Sitting where you are, how are you reading the situation right now?
You know, it's very interesting. I've never understood valuations, and I don't try and be an expert on them. I was chatting with somebody yesterday who gave me a very interesting example. You know, he was looking to invest in a company, and he said he could get to a valuation of, say, 500 million. And the entrepreneur was asking him for a valuation of 600 million. He said to him, look, give me some time to come back and think about it. And then 24 hours later, he says he has a term sheet of 1.2 billion.
The same person?
No, from another investor,
okay.
Right? So what the entrepreneur wanted versus what the previous person was willing to give him versus what the offer he got was just completely completely disconnected. So there's just so much money sometimes chasing ideas irrationally, which is also driving a very, very irrational behavior. So I think that needs to sort of sober down a little bit. And I think you're starting to see that, where there's not the chaos of money in venture, at least in the last few months, chasing ideas the way they were. The other thing that I've not fully understood is this whole move to IPO and become a public company. Having served on the board of a private company and on the board of a public company, I can tell you the scrutiny and the pressure from folks like yourself and others is incredibly high. And you've got to strike that right balance about getting to a place where you are, of size and relevance and stable, I think, to some extent.
After 2 years of paralyzing pandemic, the world is ready to bounce back. Will shifting power centers make this India's big moment? Risk, resilience and revival on the agenda. What's India's role in the global rebalance? India's top world watcher takes you to the front lines of the global high table with top minds from politics and business for the biggest global brainstorm, live and exclusive coverage only on India Today TV.
History is at a turning point, from the war in Ukraine to the climate and food crisis. From the much-wanted metaverse to unstable cryptocurrencies, get a ringside view to the ideas and challenges that are shaping the post-pandemic world. Catch me all through this week on India Today and Business Today as I bring you all the latest from a World Economic Forum that's being held this time in summer in Davos.
Presented by Aditya Birla Group, Big in Your Life. Co-powered by only OLX Autos gives the best price for your car.
Co-powered by NetMeds, India की अपनी pharmacy.
Tonight at 9 p.m. on the news today with me, Rajdeep Sardesai. The gates of an athletic stadium in the national capital are reportedly closed at 7 p.m. every night so that an IAS officer can allegedly walk his dog. The issue has sparked off a major controversy, forced the Delhi government to act. But the larger question, do IAS, IPS, IRS officers across the country get away with special privileges? Are they our new Maharajas? Also, as targeted killings continue in the Kashmir Valley, can we really say that normalcy is returning? All that and much more on the news today. News without the noise.
To get a sense of the outlook on the automobile sector in particular and the economy in general, we're joined now at the India Today studio at the World Economic Forum here in Davos by the Chief Executive Officer and Managing Director of the Mahindra Group, Dr. Anish Shah. Dr. Shah, welcome. It's great to have you with us.
Thank
We've
you.
got sparkling weather and the sun is out, so it's nice to be here.
It is beautiful.
We're seeing at this time rising inflation, increasing commodity prices, and interest rates going up. All these factors playing out simultaneously, to what extent, in your view, are they dampening your outlook for demand for what you're doing across the Mahindra Group?
So we've seen a lot of challenges, Rahul, over the last couple of years. And commodity prices have been on a significant rise. Our sense is that it depends a lot on what the geopolitical factors will play out. If things do settle down there well, then we may be well past the peak. And the actions that have been taken already by the RBI and the government will help settle things well. At this stage, the question is whether inflation goes higher than what it is. My sense is it probably will not, given some of the actions that have been taken. Demand has been reasonable so far. We have not seen a drop-off across the various industries that we've been in. And based on that, I'm cautiously optimistic.
From a customer perspective, huge queues, waiting periods. I mean, I was looking at the waiting times for some of your models, including the XUV 700. I mean, it just goes on and on. As a result, customers are double booking. It's quite a mess. I mean, how long do you see it continue in this fashion for? What are you doing to try and reduce these waiting times?
So the key driver of that is really the demand we've seen for the vehicle. We knew it was a good vehicle, but the demand has actually even surprised us. We sold 50,000 cars in 3 hours, and we're still getting more than 11,000 bookings every month. If you look back at any other launch over the last few years in this segment, there are very few launches that have gained anywhere close to these numbers, and most have been far lower. So this is again a testament of the car in itself. The challenge for us right now is to ramp up production much faster, and we are on path to doing that. There have been supply chain issues which have exacerbated the problem as well, and those have eased up a fair bit. They're not completely gone as yet, but they have eased up a fair bit, and our teams have been doing various things to find solutions around that.
So can you talk a bit about that? Because this whole idea of semiconductor chip shortage has been plaguing several sectors, and especially the automobile sector over the last couple of years. What have you done to try and build some resilience in those supply chains, and to what extent do you think you've succeeded in going from just in time to just in case?
The supply chain models in the past were just in time. They were also largely single source with high volumes to help reduce cost, and that worked for many years. What we've seen as the world has changed over the last 2 to 3 years is there are various shocks that keep coming into the system. And therefore, a single source, for example, isn't a great idea. Because if you take a specific incident during COVID, where a plant in Malaysia was shut down, that impacted supply chain for semiconductors across a large number of auto businesses. And if you don't have a second source, then that impacts production to a much greater level. So one is dual sources. Second is more standardization of parts across various models, wherever it's feasible. Some things are obviously not feasible, but in many cases it is feasible. These are all items that take longer lead times in the auto business, but our teams have been now working at it for the last 2 years and have got a lot of solutions around it. It's also sourcing chips in various different ways, relationships with chip makers and our auto tier 1 component makers. In the past, you always worried about the health of your direct suppliers. In this world today, in supply chains, you got to worry about the health of their suppliers and the health of that supply chain, and at tier 3 level as well. So it's a combination of all those factors. I think we're getting better at it now. Our teams are a lot more resilient to address any shocks that come about, and which is why it has eased a lot overall from our standpoint.
Shanghai was locked down for 7 weeks. There's a lot of chatter about how the Chinese economy is slowing down, production being impacted. How have you seen this play itself out, and to what extent is it impacting you?
So there again, because our teams had been looking at various what-if options, we've seen a lesser impact of that. Yes, we obviously have seen impact of that. But also, just to give another example, a few months ago, we sourced materials for our suppliers in advance and sort of had that in waiting in case there were any disruptions, things like palladium, platinum, rhodium, which are important for catalytic converters and some of the other parts for automobiles. So we're starting to look at how do we reduce any potential shocks with what-if scenarios, with optionality planning, and that's making things easier. That at the same time, though, is increasing cost a little bit, because each of these scenarios and optionality does have a certain cost associated with it. And that, combined with commodity prices, does have an impact on overall prices for consumers, which we're hoping will be mitigated as we go forward. But in the short run, it does have an impact.
So while input costs are going up on the one side, you also got interest rates going up, and as a result, do you see the appetite, which on the back of the pandemic seemed to be quite immense, being hit on account of the fact that loans for automobiles could and are getting costlier and will get costlier in the next few months?
We are not seeing that as yet. Part of it is because the last 4 launches we've had have been very successful. That may be a reason in there, but we are really not seeing any let-up in demand as yet for our models.
Let's talk a bit about this whole push towards electric mobility. And we're seeing two things. One is a very bullish outlook that some groups like the Tata Group have on how EVs are not just the future, they're the present, and they're pivoting heavily in that direction. Suzuki Maruti seems to have taken a slightly different view, where while they've got some models in the pipeline, they're also thinking that that's still out in the future a few years. The Mahindra Group seems to have been a bit of a laggard, at least from the outside, in terms of getting its electric act in order. How are you trying to gear up for the electric revolution?
So we've been a leader in this space for many years, and we've understood battery management systems, how electric cars are used, needs of consumers in this space. Our approach was to really leapfrog directly into born electric models. And that's what our plans are at this stage. We'll see a lot more of that in the July-August timeframe when we do a complete reveal of our plans in electric. But today, we are very confident of regaining that leadership based on the models that we have planned for and the quality that we see overall. Because electric, again, is a powertrain, and it's the rest of the car that matters as well. So the success of our recent launches gives us a lot more confidence.
And those are gas guzzlers.
Not always. If you see some of our new petrol engines, they're actually very efficient.
Relative to gas guzzlers,
yes.
Relative to electric mobility, those are big vehicles which require conventional fuels, and therefore, if the demand for those is as high as it is, how do you see the appetite for electric mobility? Not just in terms of expressing a desire, but actually making the switch.
I think the appetite will be very high, because, as you said, people do want electric cars, but they do want the design of the cars. They want the interiors to be as good as you can get in ICE cars. So all of that has to be there. But beyond that, there are 3 factors that really will drive it. One is cost of ownership. If electric is going to be a lot more expensive, then that creates a certain pause. Second is range anxiety, the ability to address that. And third is the infrastructure that comes with it. So it's all of these 3 things that will drive adoption of electric. So we do feel electric is here to stay. The question is the speed of adoption. And we will be ready with a wide range of electric options for our consumers, cars that can take a leadership space, just as the XUV700 has done. And we will continue to have the ICE options as well. And over time, my sense is electric will phase out ICE.
For the past few months, we've seen 5 international automobile companies announce their departure from India, including Ford, Harley-Davidson, MAN Trucks, your motorcycles. Is that just demand and supply, the forces of market playing themselves out, these international companies being unsuccessful, or as some who don't like the way the India story is going at this moment would suggest that this just shows that international companies are now beginning to lose faith in the India story?
Rahul, I would look at it a different way. 20 years ago, the Indian auto manufacturers were written off, saying that you've got all these international players coming in. How can these Indian manufacturers survive? Right? Today, the Indian manufacturers have actually shown they can not just survive, they can thrive. And they can actually beat the international manufacturers at their own game despite the scale and size they have outside India. So I would look at it as actually an endorsement of the fact that the Indian automobile manufacturers have actually done a very good job and have succeeded in the marketplace. They've understood consumer needs better, they've delivered better products, and that's something we are seeing with the sales and the order bookings that we have.
While every CEO has a certain amount of continuity in his business plans and takes forward what he inherits, what's the larger macro vision that Anish has for where you hope to take the Mahindra Group in terms of your USP or your stamp, your vision, which is different from what you inherited?
So I would start on that, Rahul, saying that what I've inherited actually is awesome. If you look back, let's start with the values and the purpose of the Mahindra Group. Right? That's what attracted me to the group, and that's really who we are. So that DNA for us will continue. No change in that. We are very careful about what we change. The mantra we use is continuity and change. Okay? The second part is, if you look at from when the Nifty was established in 2002 till August 2018, Mahindra was the best performing stock in the Nifty. So we've had a long history of value creation, a long history of financial discipline. And that's something that we've actually brought back. So there again, in a way, it's continuity. While it might look at change in the short run, it's continuity. The third aspect is entrepreneurship. The businesses that have been built in the past, Tech Mahindra, Mahindra Finance, Holidays, Life Spaces, were all built by entrepreneurs within the group. And that's again what we are moving forward with now. The key change that we are driving is faster scale, faster growth of our businesses. Because in the world today, that is required. What we are also driving is agility. In the world around us, if large companies are not agile, they will not survive. So those are things that we are driving a lot more now.
So apart from the companies that you mentioned, what are your big, bold new ideas?
Today we've got our 4 core businesses: Auto, Farm, Tech Mahindra and Mahindra Finance. All 4 are very well positioned and all 4 have significant growth opportunities: EV and Auto, Farm Machinery. On the farm side, Mahindra Finance is going through a significant transformation. TechM is playing in a number of new cutting edge areas from a technology standpoint. And then we've got 7 growth gems, each of which has a clear path to $1 billion of market cap in the next 2 to 4 years. So we're really driving scale in these businesses, plus looking at digital platforms to get the group future ready. And that's our game right now.
So we've seen the Tata Group, for example, with its digital play, with limited success so far, try and catch up with some of the digital startups. It's been awkward. How are you viewing what's happening in terms of a digital transformation of the consumer interface, not just at the back end in terms of transforming your own business processes, but in terms of having a super app, for example, reaching out to your entire galaxy of consumers?
We've taken a very different approach because we've really tapped into the startup ecosystem to create value. And let me share examples of what has worked already. We had a business called Mom and Me in retail. We had then acquired Baby Oil, which was an internet business, and merged with FirstCry. At that point, we had somewhere like a 40% stake with the merger. The entrepreneur who ran FirstCry was an excellent entrepreneur and he wanted to take the business forward. Other investors came in. Today, that business is valued at far greater than at the time when we merged the businesses. And we're very happy with the valuation that we got for our shareholders. Similarly, a business called Porter, which is later stage or rather earlier stage than FirstCry. But there again, we merged one of our startups with Porter. And today the business is doing very well, has a number of other investors in there. And we are creating a lot of value for our shareholders. So what we are doing is taking strong assets from the Mahindra Group and leveraging the startup ecosystem to say, can we build this into a much bigger business? Not controlling these businesses. We're not taking majority stakes. But that's how we're creating value for our shareholders.
Mm-hmm. On the question of alternate fuels, we're seeing demand surge for CNG. Do you see some of these becoming mainstream ideas going forward? Do you think while, of course, they're environment friendly, they'll continue to remain on the fringe?
I'd say too early right now. And it's worth piloting some of these, seeing how they work out. Similarly, even in electric battery technology is going through a lot of changes. And we haven't settled on the final technology for batteries as yet. But that's part of the evolution process.
If we zoom out for a moment outside of what you're doing at the Mahindra Group and get your sense of the economy's trajectory on the back of the pandemic, I mean, there are headwinds because of geopolitical tensions, what's happening in Russia and Ukraine, the impact on the rest of the world. To what extent do you think this is pushing back the growth that everyone was hoping for once the pandemic ended?
I do feel that the Indian economy is poised better than the rest of the world because our inflation is far lower than what we've seen elsewhere. The government has been very proactive in taking measures, and hopefully that will get the inflation back to the levels where it was. We are seeing a lot of demand from consumers that has not dried up even through the challenges that we've seen in the last few months. And if I were to look at a longer term trajectory as well, as you think about geopolitics, India is actually very well positioned. A lot of companies globally are looking at India and saying, that's where I want to be. We've got a democracy. We've got a government that is proactive in bringing in investors from outside, a large market that's growing, great demographics. So while we will see certain blips in the road and we will continue to see shocks from various places, we have to be ready for that. On balance, India is actually very well placed.
Okay, you are technically in a silent period, so there are certain questions we don't want to delve into, but we got a general sense of how you view the temperature at this moment. Anish, for your time, thank you very much.
Pleasure to be here, Rahul. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
When I started, I was more of an idealist, and I would not trade my mistakes because I learned from my mistakes. So I think I said it already when I said I'm really grateful. You'd have to be more specific.
Anything that you would like to change or...
You only learn from your mistakes. So yeah, while I look bad at certain experiences...
Something differently would you like to do?
That's what I mean. Like, while there are people that I trusted that I should not have, while there are films that I've made that I'm not happy with, if I hadn't trusted that person, if I hadn't done that movie, I would not have learned the lessons I learned. So it's a bit of a catch-22,
right.
So I realized, wait a minute, you had to be stabbed in the back or gaslit by that guy. You had to make that movie, even though you didn't need to or should not have, to have learned this lesson.
Right.
Because it makes me who I am today. So no, I wouldn't change anything. I'm on Instagram.
Yes, but not very active.
Kind of. I have almost 300 posts.
Oh, okay.
I mean, I do have a Twitter account and a Facebook account. I'm not even active on those at all. I just was a little bit in the beginning and then I kept away. I guess because I'm not so much out there in the numbers game, whether it be brand endorsements or big budget movies, it was perhaps easier for me. I wouldn't say this industry is easy. I'm just trying to answer your question that, there are many elements that come into play.
you a germaphobe? Do you freak out when things aren't clean? You may be able to clean things on Earth, but what about space junk? Did you know there are more than 9,800 tons of debris floating around Earth's orbit? Yes, you heard it right. Well, let us help you relax. A tow truck in space is using magnets to clean the space. The name of your space cleaner buddy is ELSA. ELSA is a small satellite fitted with a powerful magnet. It uses a magnet to clean up the debris and tows it back to Earth's orbit. While towing back, it burns up naturally on re-entry. ELSA can help clean 9,800 tons of debris floating around the Earth. Space junk is litter left behind in the orbit from the space missions. You wouldn't believe that it is traveling at the speed of 27,000 km per hour. So at this speed, even small debris could mean a huge risk. We hear about the space mission being launched every now and then, and with more than 30,000 satellites set to launch in the coming year, the space could really use some cleaning. But who made ELSA, and how does it work around space? Japanese startup Astroscale launched a model of ELSA-D. It is made up of two satellites stacked together. There are two parts, a flying magnetic tow truck and a smaller satellite that behaves like a piece of space junk. During the trial, they launched the smaller satellite and used the magnet to recapture it. But ELSA is not the only space cleaner. ClearSpace, a Swiss startup, is also launching a technology to clean up space junk. As Earth gets more active in exploring space, cleaning solutions like ELSA and ClearSpace are becoming more and more important. Do you have any fresh ideas to clean up there?
Make your media plan smarter with India Today Live TV on your connected devices.
You are watching India Today. You are watching India Today.
Tonight at 9 p.m. on the news today with me, Rajdeep Sardesai. The gates of an athletic stadium in the national capital are reportedly closed at 7 p.m. every night so that an IAS officer can allegedly walk his dog. The issue has sparked off a major controversy, forced the Delhi government to act. But the larger question, do IAS, IPS, IRS officers across the country get away with special privileges? Are they our new Maharajas? Also, as targeted killings continue in the Kashmir Valley, can we really say that normalcy is returning? All that and much more on the news today. News without the noise.